Number two on the list, absolutely nothing to do with writing copy, but I think it belongs right up at the top, and that's business acumen. So sales, knowing how to manage clients, industry knowledge. Um, for me, for sales, it's about that first contact, the email that you have, actually knowing how to respond to that in such a way that is professional and makes it seem like you've done this before. It's that first call and being comfortable on that call, turning on your camera and being able to talk about what it is you do, and actually being able to talk about things like money and timelines and expectations, and not having to wait until the call is over so that you can write it and hide behind your email, which is obviously something that copywriters love to do. And I've been guilty of it myself as well. And it's the ability to negotiate. So it's very popular on things on places like Twitter and LinkedIn to be like, name your price and that's the price, and you can't waver from that price. And if you do, you're weak and you're giving up power. But there are ways to negotiate where you're not giving up power. And so that's things like making concessions. So if they do need to bring the price down, there might be options to do so where you are doing less work or you're getting some other sort of compensation. So that could be, knocking items off the scope. I've done it. I don't know if you've ever done this, but when I'm working with like a startup, especially where they're a little bit tight on budget and maybe they can pay me like 80% of what I would typically charge, and I see it as an interesting tool, I'll say, well, pay me the 80% what you've got budgeted for this, but then I also want lifetime access to your highest tiered plan on your product. And that's worked out well for me as well. I see that as a form of compensation. In some cases, that's equal to hundreds of dollars a month that I don't have to pay as a business expense. So there are ways to sell and to negotiate that don't mean giving up any power. Client management. I think you had some
Actually,
thoughts on
before this. we do
Yeah.
client management, can I actually touch on sales. So something that we've talked about in the past before too is like so many people get into this business because they're a little bit introverted, and the idea of sales is really scary to them. And it certainly was to me in the beginning as well. And I think that there's this I think it's common for people to assume that like they know what sales is and what it looks like, and that it's this kind of like gross, situation where you're pitching and pressuring and pushing. And it's really not like that when you're selling copy. When you're selling copywriting, it's what you could call like a consultative sale.
Yep.
And it's me getting on a conversation with one or more people. I'm just getting on a Zoom call like this. And, I'm asking them some questions about their business, what they're hoping to accomplish. I'll share a very high overview of what my process is at first. It's not what I pictured in my head. If you'd asked me before, 5, 6 years ago, what that was going to look like, I probably would have pictured like, all of these PowerPoint decks and like, going through and like getting, like thinking
Super
like,
charismatic and upbeat all the
yeah, like,
time. Yeah.
yeah, like ABC, always be closing. And like,
Yeah.
not, none of that is really necessary for the kind of work that we're doing. The skill itself and what it looks like might be very different from what you're picturing, and it might be a lot more human, and you might be a lot better at it, especially over time once you get more comfortable with it than you think.
Yeah,
Um,
actually, in my opinion, I think being an introvert is a benefit when it comes to sales, because I think it's disarming, especially for people in our little corner of the world, like B2B SaaS. You're often dealing with someone who's technical. And as we both know, when you're talking to technical people, as soon as you have all that gloss and that charisma, like they are skeptical. They're like, what are you trying to convince me of? Right. Whereas if you're just a genuine person who's having a one-to-one conversation, you're happy for it to go in such a way where you don't end up being the vendor for this project. I think that builds like a lot of trust. And that actually reminds me of going way back in university. One of my jobs there was recording and editing videos for like distance ed. So we had like this whole studio with tons of video equipment. And this guy came in and he was just having a chat with my boss. And he left, and I asked who that guy was, and he's like, "Oh, that's our sales rep." I'm like, "Oh." He's like, "Yeah, we just bought $20,000 worth of camera equipment." I was like, "Wow." And he's just like, he's the most like introverted, just nice, like easy to be around guy, was not pitching anything. And to me, that's kind of like the model of what a good salesperson is. So yeah, you do not have to be that Hollywood version of sales, at least in our space. And I think it's actually good to not be that.
100% agreed. Yep.
Client management. Any thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts about client management.
Don't spoil it, because I think I think each one of these can probably be like an entire
I
recording.
know,
But
that's
any
what
like
I'm
high
realizing,
level,
because we just said
any high level
sales.
points? Yeah.
Sales, like, could do hours on that alone.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, client management. So, when they're buying a project from you, the copy is maybe half the equation. I'm just making that up. I don't know what percentage they're, paying for really, but they're paying for more than just the copy. They're paying for the whole experience of working with you.
Mm-hmm.
And the more complicated the project is, the more ways there are that it can go wrong, that it can get stuck. I can't tell you how many projects I've seen where things were going really well, and sometime later on, like even after I'm done with the project, something goes wrong, and the project never sees the copy that I wrote never even ends up seeing the light of day. It happens. It happens. So learning how to manage that project and get the best work done possible within the time frame that you've allotted for that project is huge. So that's project management, which I'm considering as sort of a subset of client management.
Mm-hmm.
How to set expectations and boundaries early on. Those are things that can be really hard and scary in the beginning, because you feel like they're doing you a favor by letting you work for them almost.
Yeah.
But over time, you realize that actually you're doing them a huge benefit when you tell them what to expect and what boundaries there are, because then they don't have to wonder about it. They just, they have it in front of them. They know, when, how long is it going to take if they email you? How long can they expect before getting a response? They should know that, and they shouldn't have to ask you. You should have already told them before the project started.
Mm-hmm.
Or very early on in the project. And again, like, these are things that took years for me to get to this point,
Yeah.
but and so every time you get a little bit better at it. I've started being better about like doing a postmortem after projects just on my own of, what went wrong, what could have, or, not necessarily wrong, but like, what could I improve for next time? And that's
Mm-hmm.
a huge tool. So every time you're making little improvements, something's going to bother you in that project, or something got stuck, you're going to figure out how to fix it next time if you take time to reflect during and after projects. How to handle difficult situations. You have to learn those kind of on the fly. Helps if you have like, for me, having coaches or a community has been really helpful for that, because
Mm-hmm.
it's really easy to get in your head. And I'm the kind of person who, if something gets sticky with a client, I can walk around all day just like thinking
Just
about it,
stewing.
worrying about it, stewing, having conversations in my head about, but I did this and they did that. So I think having that community and that support is really helpful there. How to present your copy and sell your copy. If you just send over a Google Doc, we've talked about this before, you just send over a Google Doc, like, boy, you're asking for trouble. Like, you are going to get feedback that you don't want, or like, but if you learn how to present it, you will get less feedback, or less unhelpful feedback, and more helpful feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, client management, million sub skills within that. But again, like, once you have the copy and the sales skills down, I think client management is really the next thing to master.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's definitely, like, we can have a whole hour on this. The one thing that I've learned that I'll add is a little policy, which is I will argue for my point one time. And then if they continue to push back on that, I will go along with the client and let them know that I disagree, but we'll move forward. And that's saved me a world of trouble, because what I think a lot of early freelancers do is they have a disagreement with the client and they're like, I'm the expert. And so they just go toe to toe with them, and that ruins the entire relationship. Whereas at the end of the day, we are selling services. And so it's our job to like advise the client and do the absolute best work in our opinion. But at the end of the day, if the client has a different idea, and they push back against you and they don't kind of take a step back and respect your expertise, it's best to just listen to the client and move forward and just let them know that they haven't changed your mind if they haven't, but also be willing to change your mind, because I have had it where a client says something that I didn't know before and it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, you are right. So we will go that way, but otherwise, yeah, just move forward, let them know that you disagree on this so that if it goes poorly, it's not on you.
Yeah, 100%.
Last piece of business acumen, industry knowledge. I don't know if there's anything you want to talk about on this. I think we both came to our businesses with some of this, and that's a huge advantage for us.
Yeah, I think again, like, could make a whole video on just that idea. But one thing that I think is important is learn how to speak your client's language or your prospect's language. So we work in SaaS, people talk about things like MRR and ARR, and, you should know what a conversion rate is and what's churn, all of those things. So being able to sort of speak the language, to speak their language, is just as important in copy as it is in the business of copy, of selling your copy services.
Definitely. And it's kind of like writing copy for your clients. Like, part of that is knowing their pain points, their challenges, and the words they use to describe those. And when you are actually able to kind of repeat that back to your client, they see you as like a partner, someone who lives in their space, understands their struggles, and then they can trust you when you say that you have a solution.